this is JJ from Once Somerville. Thanks so much for being here. It's great to see you. What you're about to enjoy is some special content created just for you by the Once family. We appreciate the time that the artists have given, and we've put a link to their tip jar in the comments below. We've also put a link there to our GoFundMe. This is one of the ways that we're going to get through this time until we can be open and together again. Art and community are our priorities here at Once. We really miss you, and we can't wait until we can all be back together. Until then, this is our way of holding our community close and continuing to make art. So, before you enjoy the show, a couple of notes. The bathrooms are in the back. On the left, no flash photography, and as always, no crowd surfing. Enjoy. We'll see you soon.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, is everybody there?
Yep.
My girl Kathy there?
Hi.
Hello.
Tanya, Donelly in the house?
I'm here.
All right.
In the house,
in the
literally.
house, as it were. I'm going to do a brief introduction, and then we're going to just start talking. I'm Joan Anderman. I am a music journalist and a musician, and I'm really thrilled to be here talking with Kathy Valentine, who you all know. She's a terrific musician, and now we all know a terrific writer, who is doing a virtual book tour for her memoir, All I Ever Wanted. And we're so lucky to be joined by Tanya Donelly, a local hero here in Boston, a wonderful musician with a long, illustrious solo career. She was the band Belly, she was the band Throwing Muses, and we're going to talk about Kathy's book and you name it, all kinds of other things. So I think we're going to start by letting Kathy say a few words. Kathy, hi.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to, before we got started, just kind of talk a little bit, just make a brief kind of statement about what we hope to do tonight. And I just felt like we needed to acknowledge that I know that we're all feeling pretty ragged and raw and very disturbed by the chaos that is surrounding us. Besides just the isolation and fear and confusion, you know, about the pandemic that is ongoing, we have injustice, racism, and hate, and it has us reeling. And then when we try to come together in solidarity, misinformation and destruction and rogue actors undermine the righteous and the legitimate protests. So I just want to make it clear that we are not unaware and we are not turning away from these circumstances, but we're going to take a break from them tonight, this evening. We need to stay centered and strong, and we need to fill up with the good things so that we can face the bad things. I'm grateful to you all, and to Tanya and to Joan and Bridget and JJ and all of the team at Once Somerville for supporting me and my book with this event. We are also coming together in support of the venue Once Somerville, an independent, non-corporate business hurt by the pandemic. We're also coming together to support each other as women in the arts, as writers, as musicians, as business people, and to lift our accomplishments up in hopes of inspiring and encouraging others who put their efforts and their talents into their own works. So I just wanted to kind of start things off and get that out of the way. And like, we'll just have a little pact between us that we are not ignoring what's going on, but we're gonna kind of just focus on some really good, positive, cool things for a while here. And thank you so much for being here.
All right.
Beautifully put.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think you
Thank you, Kathy.
articulated what we're feeling, and I'm grateful for that.
I had to write it down because I get so emotional. You know, I just feel like so overwhelmed, and I know we all are feeling that way. So I was like, just write it down, just focus, and let's move into our talk.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let me riff to begin with on you know, the idea of politics in society. You write in the book, Kathy, that the Go-Go's didn't write protest songs. You didn't make overt political statements. you weren't explicitly talking about sexism in the music industry or anywhere else, or feminism. And yet, simply by existing, I think, simply by being in an all-female band and writing and performing rock music and succeeding despite all of the odds, I mean, that's pretty revolutionary, just by itself. And I'm curious if you thought about that at the time. Were you aware of what you were doing, what was happening?
It felt more like us against them. It felt like us against everybody. And it felt like being in a very exclusive fun club. And I can't say that we were consciously thinking like, oh, we're breaking barriers or doing that. We kind of just were very in the moment, either because of the work or the schedule or the show that's happening right then. And because there was so little interest in that, it seemed like rather than laud our accomplishment, what was more lauded was that we were effervescent or fun, or it's just like, I don't think anybody was really trying to demean the accomplishment, but it didn't seem to get a lot of focus. So I can't say we weren't unaware, but it wasn't like some mission. It wasn't like that was the mission. The mission was really about kind of being in a band and writing cool songs and letting that take us wherever it would.
Yeah. Tanya, I'm curious to get your take on this. You are a woman who's worked for a long time in the rock music business. What's the experience been like for you, and have you seen things change for women in rock music?
Wow. Well, to Kathy's point, I think we, the Muses, when we first started, I felt like we had a similar gloss over, but ours was, weird, quirky. There, we similarly just brushed with a broad stroke. And it's hard, I feel like at the time, again, we weren't focusing on our femaleness. We were just playing our music and getting out there. But there was in the 80s an undeniable sort of zoo exhibit vibe around women on stage. Like, look, the emus are playing guitars. Like, it just felt like you couldn't really it was difficult to sort of be expansive and show the breadth of it. And people didn't dive in, as Kathy was saying, the way that we saw our male counterparts were being interviewed about process and inspiration and gear, and we were talking about being female. So we would have to direct the conversation, to where what we wanted to discuss and what we wanted to say. And it was an effort that I didn't see the guys making necessarily.
It's great that you guys had the awareness to even self-direct, because we were never asked once about our songwriting process, but they were very quick to say who wrote songs and who didn't write songs. It was almost like trying to kind of instigate things or something. But not like, how did that idea come about, or anything, or how did playing your instrument. I mean, Gina's path as a drummer is so cool. And a friend of mine was listening, a great drummer, was saying, I was listening to a Go-Go's album, and he goes, man, Gina's got one of the best, what do they call it? Feet, feet, I think they call it when they're drum, she's really good with the kick drum that I've ever heard. And I was like, yeah, she worshiped John Bonham. And yet nobody really asked her about that,
Right. Yeah. And I feel like that sort of like trying to stir something up, adding a layer of it, being my sister being the other person who's writing songs. That was that was very much a focus for a long time. Just comparing, just the nonstop comparisons, and it falls into this sort of I think, whose songs do you like better, and what does that mean about you, and how do you, their dynamic and how you process it, what does that mean about you as a listener? And meanwhile, we're just doing our thing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it should be said at this point that, I mean, probably a lot of people know that Beauty and the Beat was the first album by an all-female group to reach #1 on the charts. And what's even more shocking than that is, to this day, that album is the only one by an all-female band that has reached #1 on the Billboard charts, which is kind of a sad, commentary on how much progress has been pretty extraordinary. Let's talk about this book. I have read a lot of rock and roll memoirs, let me tell you, and a lot of them are by guys, and they overwhelmingly rehash, the familiar debauchery, which there was no shortage of in the Go-Go's. And you could have filled your book with that. But you chose, and this is such a good book, Kathy. I'm going to say that over and over again. You chose to be revealing and reflective and psychologically inquisitive. It wasn't just like, hey, look, here's the sex and the drugs and the rock and roll, and people would have eaten it up. But it felt, reading it, you talk about rape, you talk about abortion, you talk about real life. And for me as a reader, it felt like you were really reclaiming this story, the story of your life that perhaps had been, sort of channeled through this lens of this famous rock band that you were in. And I'm just curious to know if that was part of the incentive for you to write this book, and if you feel like it has served that purpose for you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really good question. I do feel like I wanted to get a sense of me out there. My friends, I have no shortage of people that I feel like know me really well, and friends and family and, relationships and friendships that go by, that have spanned decades. But I think I did have a sense of, like, in terms of, not that I ever wanted to be like a public figure or anything, but in terms of just being known as anybody in the music industry. I never come up on those lists of people, and it's like, I think we all do it. Am I on there? I feel like I was just kind of very reductively looked at. And I just kind of wanted to tell my story. I felt like I have an interesting story. I've read a lot of memoirs too, and a lot of rock memoirs. And I thought, well, my story is pretty interesting. And not just because I was in an all-female band that had a hit record in 1982 that I happened to be in and play bass on. I think my story is interesting on a lot of levels. And I did have a longing to write it, and having the vantage point of being 60, well, when I started the book, I was probably 58, 57 or 58, but having that vantage point of having survived it all, and I was in a position to be reflective. And I also had a lot of sobriety and a lot of therapy and a lot of growth as a human being, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. So I was in a really good place to do it. And I did feel like, I like what you said, the phrase you said, reclaim my story. And I felt like I kind of did want to, I didn't even, not even reclaim it. I kind of wanted to claim it and say, I'm a whole person with a history of my own that goes beyond playing the bass in 1982 on a hit record. And it wasn't like I needed to be heard so much. It wasn't like, oh, everybody has to read this and know all about me. But for me, it was important to say it and write it and recognize it and own it and make some sense out of the chaos of the years and the lives and the events.
And you write it so it's so beautifully written, which I've written to you on the side. Just you don't have to be a Go-Go's fan at all to love this book. It's such a beautiful book, and I love that. I read an interview with you where you said that you're the protagonist and the antagonist. And I think that's like just a wonderful way to approach autobiography.
Yeah.
You do, it's really clear that you make it very clear that this is from your perspective when you're talking about, things that involve situations that involve other people without constantly disclaiming, there's just that's a really hard balance to strike. And it's just so well written.
Thank you. I can't say I ever get tired of hearing that. It's just like, it just means so much. It just feels really good to get, I don't know, to do something that was so hard and so challenging and have it resonate with so many readers in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really exciting for me as an artist to kind of, I've always been in a band. You know what it's like. Well, you're yourself, but I've never been just me. I'm always me in a band. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of nice to just do something and get the credit. A lot of times you do things in a band and somebody else gets the credit. It's like, oh, that was my idea. But then you're a dick if you say it all the time. And it's like, so it's like things, it's just fun. And I'm going to just say that it's really cool. Thank you for hearing it. And I like for saying it, and I like hearing it.
This issue of having ideas and other people getting credit a little later, but I want to stick with this for a second. You dedicated the book to your daughter and your mother very beautifully. And so what I want to ask you about is writing about your loved ones, especially when those loved ones, I'm thinking about your mother, who's an incredibly complex human being. I don't need to tell you that, Kathy. And you present her as in just this very raw and honest way. She was a pretty negligent mom, and you were a pretty, feral kid. But she was also fearless and devoted, and you obviously have an intact relationship now. You're so clear-eyed and generous at the same time, which is also very difficult to do. And I just want to ask you and Tanya about writing in a book or in a song about your loved ones and saying, revealing difficult truths and saying things that will be perhaps hurtful, and how you guys navigate that.
Do you want to start, Tanya? You want to do that?
I feel like in song it's, and I have been called out by both of my parents and certain lines, that I thought that I was slipping something through. And I feel like the conversations that came from that were primarily healthy and important conversations. It's different, I think, probably in prose, where you're just sort of, telling a more fleshed out, clear story. The song piece is, I think, a more navigable, emotionally navigable in terms of, here's my dog. So I think I don't know, I can't speak to what it feels like to write a book that's so forthcoming and so clear. And again, I want to support generous of spirit also in the face of all that's revealed. So on to you.
I had the advantage of, it takes a long time to write a book. And I've probably read my book so many times. And I have every draft. I've got just insane amounts of drafts. And so I had this advantage, whereas with a song, you don't do that. A song, you tend to write it and tweak it a little, and then you're done and it's recorded, and that's that. But with the book, I really had the advantage of being able to review over and over and go, even up until when I turned it in, there were things that I would go back and read and I'd go, I don't know, that might just be going a little too far. And it was really important to me that I tell my story and not try to, like if somebody was there, I have a right. If they're part of my story, I have a right to talk about them, is the way I felt about it. But I didn't have a right to present things from their perspective or to do a sweeping I had to be very clear that this was the way I saw it. This was the way I saw it then. When I could slip it in as a craft, how I was reflecting an insight, having insight now. That was part of the craft of memoir. And that kind of helped so much because I wasn't having to do it like in a novel with a certain tense or anything. I could say how I felt at that time about the person, and I could also go back to where I am now and put in some reflection and insight, and also talk about how I understood, like if you read something and thought, oh, that was really messed up when they broke up the band and didn't tell Gina and Kathy. But then later on you read When I Get Sober, and I'm like going, how on earth, once I'm getting sober, I'm like, how could I have expected Charlotte, freshly out of rehab, to just jump back in the band and start an album? And at the time, I just felt like she was doing me wrong. And it took, 5 years later, when I got sober, to go, hey, I just sat on the couch and ate cookies for 3 months, So when I got sober, so I had that advantage. But man, I got to tell you, my dad passed away in 2018. And not that I don't mean I'm glad he passed away, but I'm glad that my dad didn't have to read it, because I think it would have hurt him a lot to know how much, and we did get a chance to talk a lot in his last months. We got very close in the last 8 months of his life. And I finished the book, after he'd passed away. But that's the thing that I'm kind of, I think would have been the hardest to navigate. Because as I got close to my dad, I think I would have gone in and really kind of start pulling out the hurtful stuff. I don't think I would have, and I didn't want to hurt people. And with my mom, I asked her I said, Mom, I'm going to write about this unless you don't want me to. This is what I'm going to write about. I'm going to write about you doing this and that. And she would say, it's your story. It's your story. You have a right to do that. And it was so wild, because I went into the book with so much resentment and anger at my mom, even before I started unpacking my lack of parenting, just kind of resentment at taking care of. And yet, as I was writing it, not only was I unpacking that resentment and processing it, but she's really earning my respect as I'm asking her, because she's giving me the support. She's like, it's more important to her that I write this story than it is for her to look like a good mom or to look good, or no, you can't say that. You can't. And if she didn't allow me to do it, it wouldn't have been near as compelling of a story, So she was incredibly brave to let me. And it also showed me how, despite all her faults and everything that she lacked as a parent, that support was always there. And I remember talking to Gina once, and Gina was like going, man, you had so much support from your mom. She said, I don't know if you really, this was a long time ago too, that she said that, and a lot of people, I don't think their parents really took it very seriously, when their kids, now it's different. Now we have kids whose parents are musicians and stuff. But in the 70s, when I was doing it, that wasn't something that teenage girls did, And my mom never said, oh no, you can't do that. And when my dad, when we were having our big bonding talks, he was like, I have so much regret. I have so much regret that I wasn't there for you, and that I didn't know you, and I said, you would have never let me go off to California and be in a band. My whole life would have been different. So this is our dream, it's cool. Whoops, my chair went down. Okay.
Okay. No falling.
I know, I'm like, woo!
Seating malfunction.
Let's talk about music. There's this one passage in the book where you were describing, I think what the chemistry of the band and what was so magical about those early records. And you were describing yourselves as hungover and distracted, impatient and cheeky, in love and in lust, indulgent and hungry, anticipating only what might happen later in the night. Everything about who we were and what we were living seeped into our record, our youth and our joy. the intangible source informing these 12 songs. And that really, I have the chills, actually, I have to tell you, just reading that. Like, it's so hard, even for people who think about music a lot, to really pinpoint, like, what's magic about a record? Why does this one 40 years later still like fill our hearts and sing to us? And I think you summed it up right there, Kathy. It just somehow you managed to capture that exuberance. And I think it was a little bit of a double-edged sword, because they put you in a box, didn't they? The you know, fun girl box that you couldn't get out of. But that feeling hasn't gone away for me. And I wonder what it feels like for you to go back and listen to those records. Do you recognize yourself? Do you recognize your band in that feeling? And do you still capture it? You guys play together. You're supposed to be on tour, I think, right now.
Yes, we are. We're supposed to be on tour. Yeah. You know, I think when you are a writer or an artist or a performer, sometimes you hit a space where it's just flowing, and we all strive for that all the time. And that little section of writing, I was so right there. I mean, it just, and as a writer, you know when you've nailed it, you know when you've done something that you couldn't possibly do any better. And it's a great feeling to have as an artist. And that had come out of what I'd written before, which was, I was realizing as I was writing, and you start going just faster and faster when it's like, when you're really in that zone. And I was realizing, like, God, for the first time, I was getting to be like a carefree, like, adolescent. Like, I didn't before, instead of having abortions and being raped and being, you know, falling down drunk, I'm hanging out with my girlfriends, kind of like nudging each other, going, look at that cute guy, and staying up late, and, you know, just kind of, it felt like being an adolescent. And it was so joyful for me. And as I was like getting more and more in that, and really realizing, man, this album was just made in the midst of just fun and joy. And yeah, it was great to go in the studio and record, but it was great to get out of the studio and go find the party and go hang out at some awesome New York club too. And to be, you know, 22 years old. And I mean, even staying in a hotel is exotic, you know, every little part of it. New York City, album, we're living in a hotel for like 8 weeks. I mean, who gets to do that? So like every single part of it felt very, just like a fairy tale, a magical thing. And when I don't really listen to, I don't go like put the record on, but I hear it in the supermarket, and you know, here and there on the radio, here and there. And I mainly just feel really proud. I don't know if I like think of it as in, since I've written that, I might be more conscious of it, but there's something about those songs that they're just a very inherently, they are good, you know, and I do enjoy still playing them. I very much do. But the thing that's funny, you said something else, and I know Tanya will relate to this. What's interesting is like how that the performance of something, how it's so much a perspective thing. Like, I think like you both are in bands, so I'm sure you've played a show where you come off stage and you're like, that was awesome. That was awesome. And then you look at your bandmate and they're like, that was the worst show I've ever done. You're like, what, you know, what are you talking about? That was awesome. And they're like, no, it was horrible. And you're like, what? And yet you're both there. And it's just like,
yeah, exactly. Right.
It's so weird.
Yeah. On paper should have been the same experience.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, for all I know, somebody else in the band might have thought, you know, it sucked making me be in the beat, for all no, I'm just joking. I don't think so. It was really exciting and great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that, you know, I have to say, as someone who rode my bike to the music store with my babysitting money to pick it up for, that's the first album that I bought with my own dollars. And yeah, I know. And I was kind of old at the time. I think my parents had such a exhaustive music library that I mostly listened to that at home, but that was my first purchase. And I just, it's just, I think also for somebody who, a young female musician who was just cutting her teeth and in the post-punk era, to have just this beautiful pop album, I feel like I've always been drawn to that musical form. There's a poetic form to that, to the verse, chorus, verse, chorus, bridge. So there's something about it that speaks to the human heart, I think. And so it was almost this permission for me to cement that in my writing, because there's also something, there's this undercurrent, there's an edgy undercurrent to that album too. There's like there's a layer of messy underneath those songs that is so appealing and kind of became my wheelhouse ultimately. But it's funny, as I loved it so much, I dancing in my room, just the whole cliche, air guitar, all of it. But it sort of was later that I looked back and realized, like, oh, that's one of my formative albums in terms of what I ended up valuing and how I wanted to write. And, anyway, thank you.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
This seems like a good time for me to say that Kathy's written a soundtrack to this book. Same title, All I Ever Wanted. And it is really, really good. It feels so vital to me to kind of shine a light on this enduring, musical life of yours, Kathy. And of course you too, Tanya, because I think, you're in a band as famous as the Go-Go's, and you tend to, that's what people think of, that's what people remember, but you've been writing songs and playing instruments and making records and shows throughout consistently. And this piece of music is the soundtrack album, it stands on its own. It's really, can I say fucking? It's really fucking great.
It really is.
And not only that, it so deepens the experience of reading the book. It kind of expands on the stories, and I found it enormously satisfying to listen to it after reading the book. So I recommend, not only should everybody go out and buy Kathy's book, in fact, somebody who's monitoring this event is now going to drop a link into the chat like magic, where you can buy Kathy's book. And you should all go to Spotify. Maybe, Kathy, there's another place where people can either buy or listen or stream the soundtrack album. And while we're talking about supporting artists, I just also want to say that once this incredible venue in our town that is not a corporate thing, it's independently owned, it provides so much for artists and for music lovers. There should be another link where you can support once, and please do that, because we value them so much. Okay, there's that.
I wanted to say, and absolutely, I can't wait to come to Boston and hang out with my new friends in Boston and do something at once. And
yeah,
but
there's an army of women here ready to.
I know
back you up on that soundtrack. But
I want to play. I want to play with Boto. I really want to.
Yeah, believe me, Boto wants to play with you.
So, but I've had so many people tell me that when they were reading the book, because I talk about music a lot in the book, I really felt like music was very central to me. And as I was growing up, as a teenager, as a musician, obviously. And so many people have told me that when I mention a record, they go put it on. I mean, I've had a lot of people say, I keep stopping your book because the minute you talk about a song or a record, I go put it on. And I just love that, because it's like, so there's not only the soundtrack that is about the actual book, but there's the music that I'm referencing as I write the book, and it kind of falls a little aside as I, as then it becomes more about the Go-Go's and whatnot. But the audiobook, I also started even adding more music because I got this amazing producer for the audiobook. I said, go for it. She goes, when you talk about learning to play like Chuck Berry, record you doing that, put that in there. When you talk about your first, and I said, I was looking through all of the cassettes and I found a cassette of my very first band. I could not believe it. And I had written like the teeniest writing ever, like every time we switched instruments, who was playing what instrument on what song. And it said, whatever the stupid band, Childhood's End, third rehearsal, it said. So I like digitized that and put that under. So there's all that music, but there's also like another music thing I did was I made playlists of every year. Like before I sat down to write, I was like, okay, I'm going to give a little backdrop, like how my parents met. And I can't just drop into 1970 out of nowhere. So I gave a little backdrop, that my mom's English, my dad's from Lubbock, and how they met. And then I plopped into 1970, which is really the starting point. And I had a list of all the music I liked when I was 11 years old in 1970, what was in the top 40, what was on the FM charts, what was in movie soundtracks. And I would listen to that. And then as I got in, because I wrote in a linear way, when I got to 1971, 12 years old, what was I listening to? And it was so cool to have, and I really, if I had time, because Jesus, this stuff all takes so much time, but I keep wanting to make those playlists public, because I love that music is such a central part of this book. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it really is. And I think that as women in the music business, and especially Joan, you've written about music and now you're in a band, and Tanya, you've been in probably as many bands as I've been in. And it's just like, music is like, but we don't hear a lot about women musicians like being just in love, crazy in love with music, It seems like we hear about their artistry or their album, but I don't have a fucking idea what makes Lana Del Rey tick about her music. I have no idea. All I know is, I have no idea about so many art. I mean, like Chrissy Hynde was the one that came closest, because she would talk about, I remember thinking it was just amazing that she got with Ray Davies because she loved the Kinks so much. It was like this wonderful little love story. But she was one of the first female artists that I heard like really talking about the music all the time that made her to play and that drove her. So I think it helps normalize the whole women who rock thing that we can't seem to ever shake,
Right. Yeah.
Seeing,
but those conversations are endlessly happening backstage. Like we're all talking, talking about it with each other. And
So people talk about the power of music, and people talk about the healing power of music. And after reading this book, Kathy, I came away with the firm belief that music had literally saved you. That it wasn't kind of a euphemism or a talking point for you, but that if you hadn't been able to make music the central pillar of your life, I don't know. Does it feel that way to you? Does it feel that vital a part of your life?
For about half the book, the working title was from the Lou Reed song, and Rock and Roll Saved Her Soul, or whatever. I forget exactly what it is, but that was my working title, because I can't write. I hate like writing without a title. I feel like I'm just like noodling. It's like, I feel like I'm just the equivalent of just noodling around on the guitar. If I'm writing a song and I don't have a title, I'm writing like a book, and I kept making lists of titles, and all I ever wanted was on my list, as was, Can't Stop the World, and many plays on Valentine, this and that. But the Lou Reed line seemed like the one that captured for a long time the theme of what music was to me.
Yeah, yeah. Tanya, do you have anything to say about the role of music in your life?
I mean, similar.
Because you were also
what she said.
You were so very, very young, like Kathy, you know, when you became a pro. It's not the typical, you know, kind of adolescent trajectory. Did you feel like you pursued that, you know, out of love, but also out of some kind of need?
In all honesty, the drive, the need, really came from Kristen initially, and she's really, it was her, you know, when we were from 14 on, she was very focused about getting shows and putting things on vinyl and making sure that we got everything out there. And so she, I would say, was the, you know, the engine initially for the first few years, and her engine continues to continues in that. And it wasn't, you know, I had always sort of thought, well, it was for me, I just felt, you know, I always wrote, and I would have written anyway, but in terms of what was going to happen with it, you know, that I had more of like a, well, I don't know where, you know, it's part of my life and who I am and what I do, and I always will, but what is my ambition for it, sort of. And I think that she and I have taken turns in terms of taking, you know, what our drive throughout the decades. But initially she was driving the bus initially. And then it was later that I picked up, that I started to write more. And it became clear that this was something that I also needed to make my life's work. So.
Okay. Got it. So Kathy, let's talk about songwriting a little bit. Seeing as journalists never ask female musicians about the nitty gritty, or not enough. It's lore, I think, at this point, that you wrote one of the band's biggest hits, Vacation, on airplane napkins, which is classic of the genre, an incredible story. But I'm guessing that your songwriting process has evolved somewhat since those days. Can you just, you know, you're in what, one or two bands right now. Can you just tell me a little bit about your artistic process, how you write songs?
Yeah. Well, I'd have to say that I'm probably always got the antenna out, you know, I'm always just like, you know, so waiting, looking for inspiration, you know. So, I mean, anything anybody says could be something, or I could be in the car. My voice memo on my iPhone probably has 1,000 song ideas, and I actually do go back sometimes and listen to them and go, oh my God, this is good. And not only just, and sometimes, and I have also, I'm not a hoarder, but I have everything that I've ever written. I mean, I keep sending pictures of, like, I have the lyrics to Head Over Heels. I have the first time, and I Can't Stop the World. And I have my first songs that I ever wrote. I mean, one of my first songs, when I first started playing guitar, I still have it, you know, and I have notebooks full of stuff. So I just kind of, before the computer and technology age, it was just always a spiral notebook and a cassette, always. And then I graduated to like a Tascam, like a 4-track. And then I graduated to like an 8-track. And now I'm, you know, really good with Pro Tools, and I use all the technology available. And even like, I still will sit down and write with a pen and paper, but I also find like just going into Word and typing makes it look finished kind of more. It's like I'll scribble a bunch of stuff out, but when I start typing it out,
Mhm.
then I don't know, it makes me, it kind of incentivizes me, is that a word? It motivates me to keep going, because it just looks more like a song. And sometimes I just sit down and just I just go over and over and over, just play something, or sometimes I'll write a bunch of words out and I'll just start hearing how I want them to phrase. And sometimes I'll just be writing music and I'll start singing a melody, and but I agonize over lyrics. Writing a book has been the best thing for me in terms of being a lyricist, because I would sit there and just be such a perfectionist. When I could get away with that in a song, because it's only a song and there's a finite amount of lines. So I could kind of spend, really, no, that's not good enough. That's not good enough, really. And with a book, I had to I couldn't write a book like that. I'd never finish. So I really started learning in the process of writing a book how to spew a bunch of stuff out, just spew it out, and then shape it and form it and ditch it and spark something else. And I have been able to start doing that in my songs now. So writing the book was awesome I think for my lyrics, because I just couldn't seem to get past my perfectionism to just spew out lyrics. It's like every line, I was judging and criticizing, too cliche, too this, too that, too obvious, too on the nose. So writing the book has really helped me for that. But I couldn't wait to get back to music. When by the time I finished the book, I was just could not wait. And making the soundtrack album was really, really fun. And I also love collaborating. I love collaborating. It's the people I write with the most are my friend Dominique, who I've been in a band with pretty much on and off since 1992, probably longer than I've been with anybody as a writing partner, and Charlotte and Jane, and then a host of other people. But I like my writing collaborations, because everybody's very confident, and you can say, I don't like that, and it doesn't wound them, which is so important if you're a collaborator. And it's just it would be hard if you had to tiptoe around, and I have to, if I write something and somebody goes, I don't like that, I don't think, it doesn't make me go, it's not good. It means they don't like it. So I'll come up with something else. So I'd like to hear about Tanya's process.
Yeah, and I feel like that's a product of age too.
Yes.
That these things that in your 20s would just lay you flat, are just part of working. You're just working now. Yeah. I mean,
it's nice to be to have confidence in your abilities, and I'm not sure I really started having the confidence. For anybody that's out there that's young and an artist, just, I hate to be cliche here, but fake it till you make it, because sometimes that confidence and belief in yourself can take a long time. I don't think I was really believed that I was very, very good until, probably my 40s.
Well, as Tanya mentioned, this is one of the gifts of time and age. It's a mixed bag, as we all know, but I think that kind of confidence and faith in yourself, and not being as invested in earning the approval of the rest of the world is a really liberating thing. In fact, Kathy, I think you wrote in the book that at 60, when you're playing music, you feel the same way you felt when you were 20, which is an extraordinary thing. It's a wonderful thing. And, I don't know if the world offers a 6-year-old woman the same place as it offers a 20-year-old woman. But you're, I'm guessing, better equipped to just sort of stake your claim to the world as a musician now. And for me, I didn't start playing music until I was well into middle age. So I have this kind of strange reference point. You know, I feel 20, but in kind of bad ways as well as good ways. You know, I think part of it is just being a newbie.
I don't think you're alone in that.
Yeah, and when I said I feel the same as when I'm 20, I think I'm talking very specifically about being in the moment. You know, I have way more confidence. I mean, after the, I mean, I feel like everything that could possibly happen, I've dealt with. So I have a lot of confidence. I mean, I've had my pants split on stage. I've had somebody hand me a guitar that was out of tune that I just started playing, and it was horrible because it was out of tune. And I've had a string break, and I'm with my band, and there's no road crew, and I have to change the string on stage in the middle of the song by myself. So I've like dealt with everything in my career. And so that brings a lot of confidence that I wouldn't have had at 20. But I think what music's always done for me is it's put me so square in the moment. And as a mom, it's even bizarre because I will forget that I'm a mom. I never forget that I'm a mom. I never forget about my kid. But when I'm playing music, I'm not thinking about anything. I'm not thinking about that. I can go and have a headache or a stomach ache, and by the time I'm done playing, it's gone.
Yeah. Right.
You know, it's just crazy. I'm like, and that's, I think, what I really meant is that it's probably one of the few things that puts me right in the moment without thinking about anything.
Yeah.
It's great. It's glorious.
It is glorious.
Precious. So this is a chapter in this book. Speaking of which, there are 44 chapters in this book, which I find
they're short ones.
Fantastic. You. There's a chapter called Shrinking, Sinking, and it's about, you know, the original demise of the band. And you know, Tanya, I guess this is for you too. You know, careers arc and stars dim. And you know, there are complicated needs and changing needs and desires in a band, and things sometimes fall apart. They usually fall apart. And Kathy, when the Go-Go's split in 1985, you felt, you wrote that you were losing not just your band, but your family. I mean, they really had filled this void inside of you, your family and your identity. And that was just wrenched away from you, and you were understandably devastated. And I wanted to ask you how you coped, how you dealt with that.
Not very well, but a part of oops. And it was not only that very clear that I felt like I was the only one that would ever take care of me. It was my job to figure, from the time I felt very responsible for anyone in my life, overly responsible. I'm sure there's a neuroses that's got a name for that, but I felt, maybe it's codependent, I don't know, but I felt very responsible for everyone. And I felt like it was my job to take care of myself. So the Go-Go's represented that. So you take that away, and what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I don't know how to do anything else. So I coped with it in two ways. Number one, the way I coped with everything, which was to pretend like everything was okay. I remember I made friends after the band had split up with Holly Knight, who had at the time written all these fabulous hit songs for Tina Turner and Pat Benatar, and we became friends after the Go-Go's. And I remember one time she said, "Kath, it's so great. You were in this big band and now it's all over, but you don't act like a loser." And I was like, "Yeah, but I sure feel like one." Because inside, I just felt like nothing was working or happening, but I always projected that I was confident and that it was just around the corner, because I had to keep a construct up, and not being able to really acknowledge those feelings of fear, a lot of fear. The money's going, I'm just plowing through the money, and I'm watching everybody else in the band kind of move on and do music stuff. And I'm just like, and I'm doing good stuff. I'm like going, this is a great band I've made. and I've got people, like big important people, helping in me and believing me, and nothing seemed to work out. So it was just, I was really, I think drinking and drugs and denial is how I coped with it.
Mhm.
Tanya?
Yeah.
Have you-
Um,
I'm just wondering if you have had periods in your life where
where I felt like the bottom fell out. Yeah.
I don't want to get too personal.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that the closest that I can compare is to when Belly fell apart. And there's actually a paragraph in the book that I'm gonna reference right now, because it's, you say that I'm gonna actually read this because basically, if you could just, it's a very, very, it's a paragraph that could easily breeze by, but I really locked into it, which is just if you could just go back basically and be more generous of spirit and less grasping, and you lose the fight when you have to, it's for the greater good, let Jane sing the song, let you play guitar, like all of these things that feel like giving up territory because you don't have the confidence necessary to be generous. That really stuck with me, and I feel I have, when I read that, and I'm not telling tales out of school, but that really brought the Belly breakup, the first one, home to me.
It's a painful
yeah,
lesson.
it is a painful lesson, and that's what young artists, if speaking to young artists coming up and asking you for tips, that's mine. Kindness and generosity and a big picture. So
Yeah, and like even today, even in present times, I mean, being in a band it's not easy. It really is not easy. And it tends to, I'm not attracted to passive band members, so I always end up,
yeah,
I end
neither
up
am I.
with, like with
Yeah.
people with strong opinions that
Yeah.
think they're just as right as I think I'm right. And,
Right.
some
Yeah.
terrible fights, like in the studio and stuff like that, where and it just took experience and aging to just be able to go, it's that whole thing, like, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? It's like a
Right. Yeah.
marriage, like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
there's a phrase that it's my fucking line, I wrote it, but this
Yeah.
person is sing, because I don't sing in my band, so I'm like constantly having to let singers do, and no, it doesn't work. That line doesn't work that way. It does not. And they're like, this is how I'm singing it. And it's like, you're just like, "Ugh." And
Yeah.
it just, finally I'm like, is it really going to like ruin the record to let the singer sing it the way they want? It just takes it's a painful lesson to learn, to let go.
Yeah. I found that very moving in the book too, Kathy, when I think you have a paragraph of what ifs, just sort of pondering, conjecturing what would have happened, if you'd let Jane sing the song, if you'd let Belinda, be the star that she wanted to be. And then you also talk about money, and you say that money changed everything. And I think that happens a lot. And it's you don't know it until you know it is the problem. Like you don't realize that happiness is so much more important than, getting X number of points, in publishing. But you can't go back, can you?
No, and you can't be, you can't be like, I don't think I would even became, the nurturing. I don't think I had the capability to I couldn't nurture myself, so I couldn't definitely nurture anybody else. I had to become a mom to learn how to do that. And I certainly no sense of empathy or compassion. I mean, zero. Not from me either. It's just like, I was very much like, you got to be tough, you got to be strong, you got a problem, you should deal with it. I equated, and I would even proudly say, I abhor weakness. I would say that. I'd say I abhor weakness. So to me, I just equated weakness with not surviving. And I felt like you had to be strong. And if somebody was weak, it was almost like, ooh, you're wounded, ooh. And it was like, it's not the best way to be, like, in a family. Imagine being and that's what a band is. It's like a family or a marriage. So imagine being married to somebody that's just like, they don't want you to ever be weak or vulnerable or hurting, because like, it's that's not an easy person to and so I wish, that's a big one. I mean, I'm a lot better to be in a band with now, because now I know that the real me, who knew, the real me really cares deeply about people. But I didn't know that at 23. I didn't know that I didn't know. I mean, I cared, like, of course I would care if somebody died or something, but I just mean, like, in terms of just like, I felt like, just move on, get on with it, deal with it.
Yeah. So I have a question. Do you want to keep writing?
Oh God, yes. Yes. I mean, okay, so it's like, I'm 61 and I'm always gonna play in a band. I like playing in a band. I was just emailing, texting with my band in Austin. The Bluebonnets are like, well, let's do something. Let's figure out something to do. And I kind of got excited because I've been so focused on me and the book. But I also, I'm aware that as I get into, number one, I'm probably not going to be in a successful band at 64, 65. I mean, I'm open if it happens, awesome. But, I don't have some, like, my dreams aren't the same. So I really like the idea of writing and combining the storytelling modalities of songwriting, like the soundtrack. I love that. I'm just so into that. In fact, I'm doing a book event on Tuesday with some other writers, and their book is called Sober Lush. And I'm like, I'm going to write a song for them, because it inspired me. And I'm going to do a soundtrack for their book. Because there's just something about it. Like, because I've been so busy writing songs for bands that, and it's just kind of fun to write songs inspired by prose. And I'd love to do a collection of short stories that had a soundtrack to them. And I'd love to do a second memoir, which I think I did this well enough. And, I think if we do something well, we don't walk away, we do it again. We try to do it again,
Story's not, you didn't finish telling the story. It ends in what, 1990?
Right. Yeah.
1990. And I have there's such another story after that's just as compelling, and people that have read the first book, they'll get to hear more about, my dad and my mom and, like, crazy ass stuff. And of course there was some really big ups and downs with the Go-Go's, but there's also motherhood and loss and aging. I mean, aging is huge. And I want to write about it. I want to write about what it is to be a woman and to get into your 50s and 60s. And, now, like, hotness is off the table. You don't get to be hot anymore. It's like, so it's just like, okay. And yet relevance is probably off the table too, unless you're like Patti Smith, who's made an entire career of being I haven't done that, so I get to try to figure out my place in the world. And I think it's something that we all do. And I really want to be one of those women that inspires and kind of paves the way for women that are going to be coming up behind me, women that are in their 40s, that are to their 50th birthday or their 60th birthday. And I want them to look at me and go, look at Kathy Valentine. She did her first book at 61. She started doing this whole cool thing, and have that be kind of a new way to, I don't know, just be of service. Move forward in a corny way, just be of service and mean something. Because more and more it's not so much about being at the top of the charts or selling tons of records. It's about how can I make someone's life a little not, I don't know, I wouldn't be so to say I would make it better, but what can I do to
I think you're allowed to
some-
say that. Actually, I think a lot of the territory that you cover in this book is of service. I really do. And I think you can own that and feel perfectly comfortable doing that.
Okay, and I have to say, like, with 31 years of sobriety, the kind of the foundation of my sobriety is being of service, and I really do. As a go-go, my favorite thing, much more than being the first female band that blah 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 blah, is when someone like you, Tanya, or Kathleen Hanna, or anybody comes up, or someone that's not made a name for themselves and says, I started playing because of you. I started writing songs. I started being in a band. Or I didn't, I mean, I had a guy come up to me in New York in a Greek cafe, and he said, Kathy Valentine. And I was like, I don't even know how he knew who I was. And he said, I moved to New York City and started working in the arts because of the Go-Go's. Because in the Midwest, when I saw the Go-Go's, it made me realize. And so those are the things that make me feel like, I don't know, like it made a difference. It really made a difference. That feels better than anything else. And so to think that I could still make a difference in my 60s is really cool.
Yeah, well, I will tell you just anecdotally, your path to sobriety inspired a very dear friend of mine and saved his life, I think.
Oh, wow. Oh, yeah, that's my favorite thing.
Well,
and
thank you for that too.
Yeah, and in I despise Facebook. I'll say that right now. I'm trying to figure out how to ditch it. But in the early days of Facebook, I would always write a thing on my sober birthday, and I would always, and it was probably the precursor to writing a memoir, because I would be very open and about it, and always I would get messages from people that said, reading that made me think I need to get sober. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's
Well,
it.
one of them was him. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Do you guys want to do any questions? I can't even see. I don't have my glasses on, but if you want to do any, or I'm totally cool to hang out. If y'all want to keep going, I'm cool. I've got my dog asleep on my lap, and
kind of reaching our natural.
Yeah. Do we have?
Are there? Let me see. You guys keep chatting. I'm going to see if there are some questions in the chat. Here we go.
I like the one from the psychologist.
Yeah, here we go. I was just about to read that. Hi, Kathy. I'm a psychologist and interested in your process. How much did the therapy process inform your writing of the book, as well as any songs?
Therapy has been crucial to me, not only as I got sober. It really helped me kind of start talking about my parents. I mean, it never even occurred to me that it had affected me, that I didn't have my dad in my life, until I was in my 30s and probably 5 years sober. That was the first time that I was like, oh. And I remember I was dating a guy once, and I was telling him about my dad, and he just looked at me, he was from Texas. He's like, your dad he really dropped the ball on you. I'd like to kick his ass. And so there's you just get these little glimpses, oh, maybe there's some stuff I need. So therapy was great when I did it, but I have to say, writing songs has been my best therapy always, because man, it's sometimes I'm just in pain, and it's always that's always the best songs too. The happy songs are always so corny and stupid, but the painful songs are always so good. And if I can just force myself to sit down with a guitar and just start doing, and then all of a sudden it starts being kind of out there a little bit instead of so inside here. I have songs that I could never even play anybody, and they're good, but they would eviscerate the person that they're about, because that's how I dealt with it. I got a lot of, you did me wrong songs. And, but the book was the cheapest, best therapy ever. Sorry, therapists, but that writing a memoir, that's the way to do it. If you have the capacity to be self-aware and honest, which I don't think you can even be sober without that capacity. So, but yeah, there was times I would just like literally just shove myself back and just like fall down sobbing, and just for days writing that book. So maybe that's another reason it's a good book, because it was real, That's kind of, I hope I answered the question.
Blood, sweat, and tears. Well, there's another question here on the subject of songwriting. Here's one for the artist. Can you please describe the difference in gut feeling you have when you hear a song that you know is a hit versus a song you really love but know it doesn't have the pop hook? So how do you know it's a hit? What's the feeling? What happens inside of you when you hear that? How do you know?
Well, you don't know it's a hit unless, I have probably lots of songs that would be hits if Belinda and the Go-Go's would have done it in our heyday. So it's like, you don't really, you need a vehicle for a hit, and you need all that machinery and stuff. But if you just mean like a perfect song, yeah, for me, it's like, if I knew I wouldn't change one thing, I wouldn't change anything. And, I recognize it in other songs. I'll hear something on the radio, or my daughter will play something, and I'll just go, that's it. That's a perfect song right there. I like Crazy, by Gnarls Barkley. It's a perfect song. It's an absolute perfect song, whoops. Oh, sorry, dog's falling. I'd like to hear what Tanya says about that too.
That is something that I think I feel like any successes aside from, I feel like the only time I felt like, oh, this is going to do well was Not Too Soon with Throwing Muses. That one just felt like everyone played beautifully. It had just a lot of different layers to it, and it was pop, but it had, it just felt, it was honest pop, and I'm telling a real story, something true, a night in my life. And I think that's part of it too, is I think people recognize when the writer can pinpoint, that it's an emotional, you're evoking something real, instead of just trying to figure out how to finish a song, where that one just flowed. But otherwise, I feel like every other situation has been kind of a surprise, in one way or the other. Things that we thought would do well did not, and things we didn't, songs we didn't see coming, as far as what people latched onto, we were surprised by. So
yeah, it is a really good feeling. It's a good feeling when you have out of nothing, you've made something that
yeah.
And I wish I could say it's just that it sticks in your head, but we all know, like, an ad jingle can stick in your head and you can hate it. So it's not even that something is hooky and gives you an earworm, it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kathy, I have an interesting suggestion for a future project for you. Are you ready?
Yeah.
This is not from me. This is from somebody in the audience.
Are they a big TV producer at Netflix?
I don't know. I'll find out after. With all the notebooks and stuff you kept, would be cool to see a scrapbook of that. Which is interesting. People really love looking at ephemera and that kind of visual history. Have you thought about anything like that, Kathy?
I would be open to it, but well, without giving anything away, there might be somebody in the band doing something like that I've
Oh, really?
encouraging a lot. But and didn't the Beastie Boys do an amazing book, like just that had all kinds of just I don't own one, but I think I remember they have like something really cool. Yeah, that would be cool to do something like that. You know, it's the problem is you just get to this point of like time and like, how am I going to spend my time, you know, and prioritizing. And I'm amazed, like in this pandemic, how quickly the days go by. You know, you think it's going to be just this endless sea desert of a day that you can just get all this stuff done. But I look up and it's, you know, and I'm tired and it's 10 o'clock at night. So I think it's an awesome idea. And I've got all the stuff, and maybe one day I will do something like that. I,
Yeah.
I like the idea of doing something like very graphic, you know, graphic stuff. Good idea.
I can see
Yeah, it is a good idea.
There's a documentary about the Go-Go's out. Is that right? It's not in theaters or streaming yet, but it's screened at South by Southwest, did it, Kathy?
No, it screened at Sundance, and there was 1 week in this pandemic in April where I was going to be like probably the best week of my life. And I was going to do a book event at NYPL. And then the Go-Go's film was going to premiere at Tribeca. And then we were going to announce a worldwide theatrical release. And then we were going to play. And then I was getting flown first class to a city to do an event where they were buying 250 books, and I was going to speak with Matthew McConaughey, and then I was going to fly back. It was like this every day was like mind-blowingly great. And then pandemic. So that was the 1 week that I like sobbed and sobbed like all day long, looking at what didn't happen. But the documentary will be out on Showtime. Showtime, August 1st, and the Go-Go's are doing some press. I just last week for it, and there's going to be a single out, and so it's cool. It's it really focuses a lot on the band's punk rock route. So I'm not even in it for like the first like 40 minutes, which is cool. But I was in Texas. You can read my book to see where I was in that part. I was starting punk band. But then it kind of goes through me joining, and then, you know, the success. It's a very celebratory documentary about. We felt like the only thing that was out there was behind the music, and it had such a skewed narrative about negativity, and I wanted my book to kind of dispel that too. And I was writing my book when I was kicked out of the band, when I was back in the band, when the documentary was being made. So it was an interesting couple of years, you know, the book spanned a lot of life, and I was writing from very different places at different times.
Yeah. Jane wrote that the documentary she felt was responsible for a lot of healing in the band. Did it feel that way to you too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's really nice. I mean, some people, I did an interview with a journalist last week, and because I said the same thing, I said, we're still forgiving and healing. And he's like, I could tell he was like, well, what the hell's wrong with you that you still even need to do that? And I was trying to like explain, like, well, you know, sometimes you don't realize you're holding something. Like, you know, it's like sometimes, like, it's like if you've ever been married and you start having, like, you'll have a fight, and they'll like, the person you've been with for years will all of a sudden say, you said this that time. And you're like, what? You know, and you have no idea, and you don't remember it, but it's like lodged in them. Well, a band's like that, coming from all different directions. So, you know, it's very healing, and we're still, I think we're more close as a band now than we've been in a really long time.
I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, I am glad to hear that too. Yeah.
All right. There are no more questions coming in on the scroll. I feel like maybe this is the place to wrap up.
I think so, because my dog is starting to poot now too. And
Around dog time.
That's it, yeah. I can also just caught sight of the fact that the sun has set on my face. So
Okay, so
Here we
pooping dog, sunset, no more questions.
no, yeah, dogs pooping, sun setting.
To talk. It's always wonderful to talk to you, Kathy. I'm so glad to know you. I can't
Yeah.
wait when this madness is over and
Yeah.
you come to Boston.
Come to Boston.
And thank you everybody for joining in this event and for listening and for writing, and to JJ and Bridget and everybody at once.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
And I also would like you guys to kind of talk about what you guys are doing, because I want everyone that might have come just to, to hear about the book, to know what y'all are up to. So if you could do that real briefly too, what you're working on, because you're both doing really cool things.
I'm in a band called Field Day, and if anybody's interested, you can check us out, in all the usual places, fielddaymusic.com and Spotify and Bandcamp. And I'm a writer, and I have dogs that need to poop as well, and that's the short version of my life.
I have a covers album coming out in August that I made with the fantastic Parkington sisters. That's coming out on August 14th, and you can pre-order it at American Laundromat Records. And every Sunday I'm also doing a fundraising series on Bandcamp, on my Bandcamp page. So
Cool.
Covers are a big part of my life right now.
Yay.
Other people's songs. Yeah. And what actually Automatic, a go-go song is one of
The
our
Go-Go's love your
one of the
book, Automatic. And I was so happy when I looked up Joan's band Field Day and listened to them, and it was like, oh, I really like this band.
so good.
I think it's so what you did to start a band, like not in everyone I know started bands when they were like young and just figuring it out, and you went and did it later in life, and you did it great. So what an inspiring thing to do. And I think anyone that's here in this group, take inspiration from Joan too, because it's never too late. And I didn't my dream was to be a great lead guitarist. And then I went a different direction. Punk rock made me went, I need to be great. And then I became a bass player in the Go-Go's. And it wasn't until my 30s that I started going, I want to be a great guitarist. And I didn't start till my 30s, where I could really play to my ability. So I just want to leave that out there too for everybody. It's never too late to pick up an instrument, to start a band, to just kind of go for it, do something new.
To get sober, to anything.
Yes, anything.
That's
and Joan, I actually remember years ago, you and Gary Smith and I were at dinner, and you were saying, I think I want to start a band. It was like this, when it was the seed, the seeds were being sown. Yeah.
Good band.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, what a pleasure.
All right.
What a thrill. Everybody stay safe, take care. Let's do our part to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
And thank you once, Somerville. I can't wait to be there in person. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Great job. Thank you.
Oops, I can't find the Zoom thing.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye, all.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I'm